Happy New Year! What was the best book of 2022? Personally, I read 38 books over the course of the year. 14 of those were new releases. So in this video, I would like to share with you all of those new releases I read in a list ranked from the worst book to the best book. That is based on my personal rating on a scale of 1 to 10. I have a few great books that I'm really excited to recommend, but we need to start at the bottom with the bad books. Coming in at number 14, the very bottom of my list, the worst new release I read in 2022 without a doubt is Yinka, Where Is Your Husband? By Lizzie Damilola Blackburn. I give this one a 2 out of 10. I already talked about this one in my latest Malala's Book Club video. It is supposed to be a romantic comedy. The main character is not likable at all. She doesn't get any redemption or development throughout the book. I was not rooting for any of the potential love interests. There are some unbelievable plot events later in the novel. This is the one new release that I can confidently say is a bad book. But we're not at the good books yet. I read quite a few books over the course of 2022 that were just okay. So let's look at the alright books. Number 13 on my list is Read Dangerously: The Subversive Power of Literature in Troubled Times. This one is by Azar Nafisi, and I gave it a 4 out of 10. The one thing this book really suffers from is from not really knowing what type of book it wants to be. I can't say that it's a bad book, but I don't really know if it's a family memoir. It's epistolary, so it's written in letters to the author's father, but it talks specifically about particular writers and their works. So is it a collection of essays? Is it literary criticism? Whatever it is, I was surprised by the nuance at the beginning of it, but I lost interest pretty fast, and the confusing genre and style leaves a lot to be desired as a book. Number 12 on my list is Lost and Found by Katherine Schultz. I also gave this one a 4 out of 10, but it's slightly higher because I know that it is a memoir. It's definitely a memoir. I was intrigued by this book at the beginning of it, but I was quickly turned off by the writing style. It's too academic, too intellectually written, especially given the fact that it's a personal memoir that deals with things like grief and love. Those are very human emotions. To me, the intellectual writing style seems like it's trying too hard, and it takes away from the human emotion of it. Number 11 on my list is A Very Nice Girl. This one is a novel by Imogen Crimp. I gave this one a 4.5 out of 10. This is Imogen Crimp's debut, another one I read for Malala's Book Club. This one is kind of a romance, but more of a drama, really. It's about a young woman trying to follow her dreams in London of becoming a dancer, but then she gets involved with a man who's a little bit older, and there's some on and off drama there, and she has to juggle those things, and then also some drama with one of her friends. It has some good parts in there. There's some good steamy romance, but overall I wasn't that invested in the drama or the characters in this one. Number 10 on my list is a book called Butts, A Backstory by Heather Radke. I gave this one a 6 out of 10, jumping up a little bit. This one definitely has something to offer, and it's the best nonfiction subtitle of 2022, without a doubt. From the beginning of this book, it started out as just the type of social studies book that I love. It takes one specific subject, it has a narrow focus so that it can go into a surprising amount of depth with just one topic. So the first few chapters, we get an introduction, and then we learn some interesting things about biology and human evolution, focused on the rear end. Then we learned some history about how butts have been represented culturally and kind of analyzed and talked about. That stuff was all super interesting. But then from there, it kind of fast forwards in time, and Radke focuses on a few pop cultural events throughout more recent history. Those pop culture things kind of lose the narrow focus to me. The author uses specific examples from pop culture and then extrapolates too much. She kind of overgeneralizes and starts making these arguments that can't really be held up as claims with small evidence coming mainly from pop culture. That being said, they do connect to those beginning interesting chapters in a way, and it does touch on some interesting pop culture moments like Baby Got Back by Sir Mix-a-Lot, for example, and Jennifer Lopez in general. So this one definitely has something to offer. It's kind of interesting, fun read. Number 9 on my list is a book called Teaching White Supremacy, America's Democratic Ordeal and the Forging of Our National Identity. This one is by David Yakavone, and I also give this one a 6 out of 10. This one is a nonfiction book. It's a history book, and it talks about the beginning of the United States, really from the beginning of the slave trade in 1619, through the American Revolution, through all of the 19th and 20th centuries, and then looks at where we are today. Throughout that time, it's focusing on the ideology of white supremacy and how that has been taught in schools. I learned some interesting things about U.S. history from Yakavone's detailed argument here. He makes his argument from analyzing textbooks. Through his analysis of textbooks, he makes the argument that it is the northern states that have played a larger role in teaching the ideology of white supremacy. That's a pretty interesting argument because even today there are a lot of stereotypes about the South being more racist, and when it comes to education, they are usually the ones that more dramatically and obviously fall short, and nowadays they ban books a lot more often. So it's a really interesting U.S. history topic. That being said, I feel that the audience is a little bit too narrow in this book. It's for teachers and educators specifically. I mean, it's a meta-analysis of textbooks throughout history, so it's not super engaging or easy to read. Because it's not accessible and easy to read, I feel like it falls short because it won't reach a wider audience. History is super interesting. I keep getting more and more interested in history and the history of my country, the United States specifically. And it's unfortunate to see how history books are often so boring, no matter what they're teaching. Number 8 on my list is Disorientation by Elaine Hsieh Chow. This one I gave a 6.8 out of 10. Here's another one I talked about on the Malala's Book Club video. So go check that out if you want to hear me talk in more detail about quite a few selections on this list. But this one was a really funny novel throughout most of it. It's a funny satire about politics and the culture wars in the United States, focused on a university setting. But toward the middle, later half of the book, it kind of falls apart and the characters don't feel real anymore, so it didn't quite make it into the good books category for me. Number 7 on my list is a book called The Sturgeon's Heart by Amy E. Casey. This one I gave a 6.9 out of 10. Even closer to making it into the good books category. I really wanted to rate this one higher, but the ending let me down, which is the main thing that made me lower my score. This book starts really interesting as we get a few different characters. We switch perspectives between a few different characters living in the northern Midwest part of the United States. The interesting thing is that one of the characters wakes up, looks in the mirror, and sees that he has no skin. Or his skin is invisible, we could say. It's kind of a mystery. That's what the interesting mystery is of it. He looks in the mirror and he sees the muscles of his face. He sees all the muscles of his body, which you should not see if you have skin. So he's freaking out. He doesn't know what to do. He doesn't know what's happening. Well, I don't want to give away too much of what happens in the plot in case you want to read it, because it's really interesting. It is well written, but toward the end, the ending kind of fell flat for me, so it doesn't quite make it into the good books category. That being said, that is my last book that was just all right, and now we are going into the category of the good books. Number 6 on my list is You've Changed: Fake Accents, Feminism, and Other Comedies from Myanmar by Pyemotet War. This one I give a 7 out of 10. I don't really have anything bad to say about this one. This one is a good collection of essays that I read for Malala's Book Club. This is Pyemotet War's debut, and she writes about some personal topics and some interesting topics in a fun, engaging way that's easy to read. It's not doing anything too amazing or revolutionary, but I had fun reading about some Myanmar culture that I didn't know about, so I'd be interested in checking out the next book that Pyemotet War puts out. Breaking into the top 5 is Neruda on the Park by Clevis Natera. This one I gave a 7.7 out of 10. I liked this one quite a bit. Another one I talked about from my Malala's Book Club video. This is a debut novel by Natera, and it is an interesting story about gentrification and some generational family drama. So it focuses on both a mother and a daughter. The chapters alternate between perspectives from the two, and both of them are worried about their hometown, their neighborhood becoming gentrified as they're building this fancy building right across from where they live. They're worried everything's going to become too expensive and they're going to be pushed out. The mother devises this crazy plan to make their neighborhood worse and scarier and more dangerous so that the gentrifiers won't want to focus on developing there anymore. From that wild premise, it just gets crazier as it goes, as the plans need to ratchet up in intensity throughout the novel, and the mother's kind of losing it. And then meanwhile, the daughter is also worried about gentrification, but also kind of flirting with this guy who is involved in the development of that new building. So she's kind of on the fence about it, and I don't want to spoil any more. This one is worth a read. If you like novels like this, it's an interesting one. Okay, those were the good books, and now moving up a little bit, we have the damn good books. At number 4 on my overall list is How to Be Perfect: The Correct Answer to Every Moral Question. This one was written by Michael Schur, and I give it an 8.5 out of 10. This is Michael Schur's first book, but you might know him from one of the many TV shows he's been involved with. He has worked in some capacity for a lot of famous U.S. sitcoms, starting with the U.S. version of The Office, where he was, I believe, a writer, and he also played the role of Dwight's cousin Mose Schrute. From there, he worked on Parks and Recreation, Brooklyn Nine-Nine, and then more recently a show called The Good Place. If you've seen The Good Place, you know that that one is about morality and moral philosophy. Mike Schur did a lot of research in developing the show Good Place, reading a lot about philosophy and talking with actual academics and philosophers from today. From that research, he put together this book, How to Be Perfect. It's a book about moral philosophy that kind of gives you a survey and an overview of the great thinkers, their ideas, and then Mike Schur even puts his spin on it and offers a few things of his own to the moral philosophy conversation. So this isn't a super serious philosophy book, I will admit. So if you're a serious hardcore philosophy academic, this is probably not the book for you. You probably already know all the things he covers, and then you might think he doesn't offer a lot. But the reason I think this is a damn good book is for its entertainment value. Unlike books like Teaching White Supremacy, this one is approachable and accessible. This one will be easier to read for a general audience. It's fun and engaging, and You can learn some things from it, but it doesn't go into an extreme amount of depth that would be too much heavy lifting for the average reader. How to Be Perfect is like taking a philosophy survey course from the funniest and most down-to-earth teacher that you probably have in, a prestigious university setting. So this one's really good based on its entertainment value. I recommend it to anyone that is interested in being a slightly better person. All right, now breaking into my top 3, we're also moving to the category of the great books. These top 3, in my opinion, are all great books, and I would highly recommend them to anyone. Number 3 on my list is The Other Side of Nothing, The Zen Ethics of Time, Space, and Being by Brad Warner, which I give a 9 out of 10. If you're not familiar with Brad Warner, he is an American Buddhist monk, a Buddhist teacher, and also a punk rock bassist, known for being in the band Zero Defects. His debut book was called Hardcore Zen, which is also nonfiction, kind of memoir focused. Talks about how he got into Buddhism and Buddhist philosophy through his life and experiences, and then of course talks about what Buddhism is. That was the first book that got me really into Brad Warner. I loved Hardcore Zen. I give that one a 10 out of 10. There's another recommendation for you. I read Hardcore Zen multiple times and then got into reading his other books. Brad Warner also makes videos right here on YouTube, so if you want to check out what he does by getting a little taste of how he teaches, I recommend going over to his YouTube channel and watching a few videos of his there. And if you're interested, you should check out some of his books. I had already read some of his books, and I keep up with his YouTube channel here and there. So when I saw that he was publishing a new book called The Other Side of Nothing, I definitely wanted to check it out, and it is great. Out of his books that I've read, I think it's his book that goes into the most depth into Buddhist philosophy. It seems more, I don't want to say serious, because his other ones are serious Buddhism, although they are funny and engaging. What I want to say is it seems more rigorous, I guess. He really goes into depth on the things he's talking about Buddhism. He will introduce a topic, he'll give definition of it, but then also different translations throughout time from different scholars or Buddhist groups, and then he'll offer his own translation and interpretation of each subject. So I absolutely loved that style of writing in this book, going into a lot of depth and offering a lot of information to the reader so that you can make your own interpretation on these heavy Buddhist philosophy topics that he is introducing. Okay, number 2 on my overall list is Babel and How Punctuation Saved It. This one is written by Carolyn Adderson, and it has illustrations by Roman Muradov, and I give this one a 9.5 out of 10. This one is such a fun read, and it's super good. This one is a children's book. It's supposed to be for kids around 6 to 8 years old. It's about a town called Babel where they haven't figured out punctuation yet. They have no idea punctuation exists. So everyone is just constantly talking. They're talking over each other. Nobody can understand each other. They can't separate thought from speech until a little girl comes to town with a magic bag filled with these strange symbols that we now know today as punctuation marks. The period, the comma, exclamation marks, quotation marks. Babel reminded me of one of my favorite childhood books, which is Harold and the Purple Crayon. But this one is the little girl with the red-orange punctuation marks. And instead of it being about creativity and going on this journey away from home and then coming back home, it's about bringing, we could say, the logical, organizing parts of linguistics to the community and helping people communicate more effectively and bring people together. So it's a fantastic children's book. If you have a child in this age range, I would highly recommend that for helping them figure out punctuation. And it's a great read for anyone. I'm an adult. I read it as an adult without reading it to a kid, and I highly enjoyed it. So Babel is a great book. And finally, we are getting to the number one spot on my list. So we will finally answer the question, what was the best book of 2022? Out of the books I read, the best new release I read during 2022 was Recitative by Toni Morrison. I give this one also a 9.5 out of 10. Recitative was not written during 2022, of course, because unfortunately Toni Morrison is no longer with us. But Toni Morrison's rare short story, Recitative, might have been hard to find before 2022. That's why it was released and published as a standalone story in a little book, so you can read just Morrison's great short story, Recitative, and it has an introduction by one of my favorite authors, Zadie Smith. So when I first saw that this book was being released, I was immediately interested in it because I had never read anything by Toni Morrison. Toni Morrison is considered one of the great American writers of all time, but somehow I had never read anything by her, a short story, a novel, an essay, nothing. To me, that was a shame because I hear so much about her, and if you didn't already know, I majored in English literature, so I took American literature classes. I even took a class called 20th Century Fiction by Women, and in all those classes, we never read any Toni Morrison for some reason. So I felt like I was missing out on something when I saw the news that a short story by Morrison was being republished on its own. I was interested in that. I thought maybe a short story would be a good place for me to start to try out her writing because it's easier to get into than a full-length novel. And then I saw that there's an introduction by Zadie Smith, and then I was immediately sold. I knew I had to read this book. Zadie Smith is not an American writer like Morrison. She is a British author, but she is Black like Toni Morrison is, and that becomes important given the topic of Recitative. So Recitative focuses on these two women who at the beginning of the short story are young girls growing up together in sort of an orphanage type place, and they're super close. They're basically sisters, best friends, but then throughout the short story it goes to later in their life where they grow apart, but then occasionally come back together and touch base, and then they have some different ideas, different memories about how their childhood was, and they have different perspectives on the civil rights movement that is now happening in the United States in the story. So the main thing that's happening in the story later is they're having the conversation about should schools be desegregated. And here is the interesting thing about Recitative is that one of the girls is white and one of the girls is Black, of the two main characters. But Toni Morrison never lets us know which one is which. Yeah, it says from the beginning, one of them is a white girl, the other is an African American girl. But then we never get to know by the end of the story. And that's not really a spoiler, that's the premise of it. So basically, from the beginning, you might think, who cares? It's not an important detail to know which character is Black, which one's white. That shouldn't be an important thing to know about a person, right? However, of course, in the context of the civil rights movement in the U.S., it matters a lot whether you're Black or white, and that will color your perspective. So, Recitative is a really engaging read. I couldn't put it down. I read it super fast, and I would love to read it again because it is a puzzle that you could never solve. It will keep you guessing. Morrison gives little hints that tug in both directions, but you never get to know who's Black and who's white. And what's so great about it is that it makes you think critically about just how we think about race in culture. On one hand, you could say that it's not real and there's really no difference between people of different races. But then on the other hand, it's clear that people are treated differently based on the idea of race that's always changing. So it's a weird paradox that is like a puzzle in real life. Thank you for watching to the end of my list of the new releases that I read in 2022 from worst to best. I also released a book during 2022. Of course, I'm not going to include my own book on the list, but my debut novel, Animal City, Cannibal World, was published this year. It's available right now. You can find it in the link that I have down in the description. It's kind of a mysterious, spooky crime thriller. And you'll also find my poetry collection, A Word Is Not What It Means. Also, you can follow me on Instagram at Dylan Allen-Perez if you want updates and post about books and things like that throughout the new year, 2023. You can also read more in-depth book reviews over on Goodreads. You can follow me on there if you want to see that type of thing throughout the year. And before I sign off here, I would love to know what your favorite new release was that you read in 2022. There were so many new releases I was interested in reading that I didn't have time to get around to, unfortunately. So I know I missed out on surely some good books, maybe some great books that I'll have to try and get around to reading in 2023. So please, if you read any books in 2022 that you would recommend that were not on my list, let me know in the comments below. Alright, and as always, thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you enjoy the next book that you read. Bye.